Hi there, this is Andrea Maury of Drea Renee Knits, and this is All Knit If I Want To, a weekly podcast where I try my best to answer some of your questions. I just finished up my walk and I've got wings, but we're just gonna go with it. I actually only have a very set amount of time to do this today because I have a meeting. So we're gonna get down to business. First of all, I am knits on knits on knits on knits. It has been very chilly here, especially in the first half of the day every day. So today I am wearing my Harlow Flip. This is knit up. I have to look at this one. Okay, this one is knit up in the Farmer's Daughter Fibers Pishkin and Spin Cycle Yarns Dream State. I am also wearing my Traveler hood. This little number has become my favorite thing to throw on, especially layering it with other knits. It is bringing me great joy. So this cutie patootie little hood is knit up in Spin Cycle Yarns Metamorphic, which is a really cool yarn where they take their mill waste, which would be the fiber that would typically just be thrown out from making their main yarns, and now they take that those like beautiful colored fiber waste bits and blend it in with 50%, I believe, American wool and create this whole new yarn that gets rid of the mill waste. So it's very cool. It's called Metamorphic. That is what this is. And then underneath I've got on my Weekender crew neck, and it's called the Weekender Crew, and this one was knit up in my hand spun, which is CVM from a farm here in Michigan. So I'm cozy to the max and ready to answer some of your questions as soon as I pull that list of questions up. Nope, not right there. Okay, question number one. I think this is something that we've probably all run into at one time or another. I purchased yarn on a vacation to make a shawl. This knitter is a monogamous knitter. They finish every project they start, and they're a one project at a time sort of gal. Knit until completed. However, the pattern is not feeling good to them. They feel like it's poorly organized. They've ripped it back and had to start over. Now they're well on their way, but it feels like a slog. When I'm knitting it and I'm doing the cable and lace work, it's enjoyable, but in my heart, I dread working on it. I know most would advise me to give up and move on, but I really see this as an exercise in persistence and resilience. Am I crazy to keep going? Or would I feel better if I shared my knitting time with another project? And that might be the key to making this one shawl knit less tension-inducing. Again, it is not a hard pattern, it's just disorganized, and I spend a lot of my time strategizing and making my own notes than I do actually knitting. Any insight you may have to offer would be appreciated. Surely others have experienced similar situations. So I do have a few thoughts. One, could you go through the rest of the pattern and wherever you're taking notes in your knitting notebook, rewrite it in the way that feels organized and clear to you? So I did this almost every time I knit a pattern back before I started designing, is I would basically rewrite it in a way that it made the most sense to me. And I just had my little knitting notebook, and I loved it too, because then if I ever knit that pattern again, I had like my me-made perfect version of it that I could easily follow. So that would be one thing. If you could put in a little front time now so that the rest of the knitting on that shawl can be more enjoyable, I would consider doing that. Maybe that's not a possibility. You might not know until you're at a certain section, oh, okay, this is why this is weird here. But if you could, I think that would be really helpful, especially if you're determined to finish the project. If you want to add in a second project so that you could have breaks from this one, I think that's a lovely idea. Personally, though, I always have multiple projects going. I usually have one main project that's getting like the majority of my focus, but I definitely love to have a relaxing knit that I don't have to think a lot about, maybe something smaller I can take on my walks. So I do always have a few projects, and I think different projects are good for different times. So we might have a knit that's perfect for our knit night where we don't need to pay attention while we're chatting with our friends. We might have a knit that really engages our brain in a way that can feel so good while we're crafting, where we just really want to get in the weeds with a project. Maybe we have like this bigger project that stays at home, a smaller one that we take around with us. So I don't think it's a bad thing to have multiple projects. The only thing I could see happening is it doesn't sound like this pattern is bringing you any joy. It sounds like it's making you a little miserable. Like bringing that, the way you use the word tension, it's like, oh, we don't want to feel that way when we're making. Lots of times when we are making things, we're going to have moments of that for sure, especially if we're trying to stretch ourselves, learn something new, do something we haven't done before. There's going to be a little bit of discomfort that can come with that. But overall, we want it to be like a joyful, fill ourselves up experience. So the only thought I had is, if you bring in a second project, are you just going to end up ditching the shawl and kind of tucking it away on the shelf, never to return to it? If you do that, then it might just be one that, frog it, add it to the frog it pile. And maybe that's just not your thing. You're like, oh no, ma'am, I will be finishing this. Even if I end up giving it away to somebody, it will get done. So that's going to obviously be totally up to you. But I think it could be nice to give yourself some breaks, because what you don't want to do is throw yourself into a knitting slump, because this is so not fun that it's kind of, it's a little bit of a killjoy when it comes to your knitting. So I think having like a fun, relaxing side knit to do, maybe even swapping them out every other day or something like that, could be really nice. I felt like there's one other thing I wanted to say, but I don't remember. But yeah, I think those, and then I guess I already kind of said it, is like, not every knit is going to be a winner. Thankfully, hopefully, most of them are, but sometimes you get a dud. And I feel like I have at least one design a year that I feel like is a dud, that I'm like, yeah, that one's just not gonna be a winner, and that's okay too. I mean, that's part of the making process. And the really good news is that as knitters, we can just unravel and we can use it for something else that is really bringing us joy, that we really love. Now, if you're like, I still really love the look of the shawl, I'm gonna wear it, or I'm gonna give it to somebody and I'm really excited about that, then do whatever you can to make the actual knitting of it feel happier for you again. All right, question number 2. I am a novice knitter and like to watch knitting podcasts while I knit. I see several people taking a pattern written for one weight of yarn, but knitting it by holding a lighter weight of yarn held double. For instance, I saw one person knitting a sweater that was written for DK with 2 strands of fingering weight. How do they figure out if they have the right gauge? If the pattern using DK calls for 20 stitches and 30 rows for a 4-inch swatch, would they have 40 stitches and 60 rows if holding 2 fingering weights? I have lots of fingering weight yarn that I would love to use in some DK patterns, but I want to make sure I make something that fits. So no, what you actually would want to do is you would want to swatch holding those 2 yarns together and still get the exact gauge in the pattern. So if the pattern calls for DK weight yarn at 20 stitches and 30 rows, you would want to take the fingering weight yarn you want to use, holding 2 strands together, knit a swatch, also trying to achieve 20 stitches and 30 rows for 4 inches. So you would want to match that exact gauge. And generally speaking, 2 fingering weight yarns held together does equal a DK weight yarn, so that's a great place to start. You can look up online. I know I've included them in past episodes, but you can absolutely look up online a little like yarn calculator for equivalence of this many strands of yarn equals this thickness. And that's a great jumping off point so you know about how many to start with to get the weight you're trying to achieve. But at the end of the day, whatever you're going to use in that project, however you're going to hold them, is how you want to swatch for the project. So again, holding both yarns together to do your swatch and hit the gauge in the project. All right, next question. Do you have any tips for a large circumference tubular bind off? It seems so daunting for an entire sweater hem. Okay, so when it comes to a tubular bind off, I don't want to forget. I'm going to pull this up right now. So I want to make sure this doesn't autoplay. It's a tutorial. Okay. So when we're doing a tubular bind off, basically you're always going to have 2 setup rows. Where you're going to slip every other stitch and work every other stitch. Once you do that front and back, or going around twice, which you would if it's a sweater, not a cardigan, then you're going to just Kitchener stitch to bind off all those stitches. So that's all it is. My favorite thing that has made this less daunting for me is I do Kitchener stitch on 1 needle. I do not separate my stitches out onto 2 needles with my knits in the front and my purls in the back. I just keep everything on that 1 needle, and it removes that whole extra step, which I appreciate. And once you've done this a few times, it's pretty easy to memorize, but I also have a tutorial. So I'm gonna put this tutorial right here. That didn't do it. Okay, I will add that. So basically, it's gonna drive me bonkers. Okay, now I have it. Now it's been added. So the other thing that I recommend doing is acknowledge it's gonna take a little bit of time. It's kind of like blocking or seaming something. I think in our heads, we think, okay, I'm just gonna bust this out real quick. I'm just gonna really quickly block this shawl. I'm just gonna really quickly seam this in. And it takes longer than we've kind of given ourselves time for. And that's when it also feels more daunting and kind of like, oh, I just wanna be done. So know it's gonna take the time it takes. Get yourself a good audiobook, a good podcast, your favorite jams. Set a mood, set a vibe. Get your cup of tea, your cup of coffee, a lovely electrolyte water, whatever you've got going on, and just set yourself up for success and be like, I'm really gonna enjoy this relaxing, repetitive motion of Kitchener stitch around the bottom of this sweater because it's gonna look so good. I mean, I've got it on the sweater I'm wearing right now, and it just creates such a beautiful finish. I mean, look at that. It's gorgeous. So, but I do kind of set myself up for success for the things that I do not enjoy doing. I make it a mood so that I can enjoy the process and I'm not fighting against it anymore. But also, Kitchener stitch on 1 needle was a game changer for me. So I hope it is for you too. Okay, I picked this one because I knew it was going to get asked. I'm getting emails and stuff like that. Where can we access the pics taken of the meetup on the hill from Rhinebeck? I don't have them yet. I promise I will share them everywhere once I have them. I will throw it in my newsletter. I'll put it in the Ravelry group forum. I'll put them in both the forum for just the knit along and also in the FO forum just to make sure I'm hitting on all those spots. We'll definitely post it on Instagram. I'll make sure that Spin Cycle puts it into their Facebook group. We'll be sharing it everywhere. I'm sure all 3 of us, Farmer's Daughter Fiber, Spin Cycle, and myself, will get it into a newsletter for you. We're just waiting. The photographer had a week in New York before heading back home. So as soon as they have the photos, I will definitely be sharing them. So they will be coming and I will share them everywhere as soon as I have them. All right, last question, and I have 9 minutes. I'm doing great. Okay, my question now, I jinxed myself. My question is a follow-up to something you talked about in episode 239 about purling in combination knitting. This is how I purl when ribbing or cabling, but until I saw yesterday's episode, I didn't realize that's what combination knitting was. My question is, as it uses less yarn purling this way, do you find that throughout a project with a lot of ribbing, your fabric ends up being less stretchy? I'm currently knitting a pair of all over 1x1 rib socks that are meant to be slouchy on the leg. And even though I used bigger needles than I would normally use for socks and more stitches, my socks are not slouchy at all. In fact, they're on the tight side. I can't think of any other reason than the way I purl to account for this. So I was wondering if this is something you take into account when writing a pattern and choosing a needle size. If there's a lot of ribbing, such as the DRK Everyday Socks. And also, if, as knitters, we should allow for this by going up or several needle sizes when following a pattern if we choose to purl this way. So I love this question. This is definitely a thought-provoking one. Personally, I think it is such a minor adjustment. I've never had it affect my gauge overall. That doesn't mean it's not going to for someone else. I'm also in the midst of doing my first quilted project, sewing. Can actually kind of see like my little thing set up over there. And they showed, I actually just read this blog thanks to my friend Jessamy, who shared about a scant 1/4 inch. If I got any quilters, you would know all about it. It's all new to me. It basically is one thread width smaller than a 1/4 inch. So I'm talking minor. And this blogger showed the difference if you had done it correctly or if you'd done a true 1/4 inch, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like we say in knitting as well with a gauge, like if you're off by a 1/4 stitch, when you've got 200 to 400 stitches on your needles, that adds up. So I have never had it affect my gauge, especially in something like socks. I mean, I've definitely done a pair of DRK Everydays doing combination knitting for the whole thing. I've also knit those socks without doing combination knitting, and it did not change my gauge. But that doesn't mean it can't. And if you think it could be for you, really what it boils down to, as I just really take my way to get to my point. What it comes down to is it sounds like your gauge is too tight on those socks. So regardless of if it's because of combination knitting or it's just your current gauge compared to the one you need for the socks, you do need to go up a needle size. You need to change your yarn to get the gauge that's required. Like I would be very curious if you checked your gauge and compared it to what's in the pattern. Because it can also be, it might just be the fact that you're doing socks, that you're doing small circumference knitting. We tend to knit a lot tighter small circumference than we do on something like the body of a sweater. So there could be so many different factors, but this is definitely an interesting one. It's one that I'll definitely have bumping around in my head, and I'll be curious, anybody else who's watching this who does combination knitting, have you experienced that? Have you noticed a change in your gauge from wrapping your yarn the other way for your purl stitches to use up a little bit less yarn? Have you noticed any change? I think another reason why I don't lean that way is also just because what we're trying to do is mimic our knit stitches. So for instance, if you were going to just be doing stockinette, like a vanilla sock, you're not purling, but your purls, if you were, would be closer to that knit size. So you should actually be getting closer to gauge in that way. But yeah, gauge is a constant balancing act. And so I think there could be a few things going on, but I would be very curious for you to maybe take some notes and see if that is something for you. Maybe your gauge is greatly affected by it, and it's definitely something to keep in mind. Oh, hey, this pattern has a lot of purling going on, which means my gauge might be a little tighter than I thought it was going to be. But check your gauge on those socks and see. Another thing I want to say, I'm so happy I didn't forget. How much time do I have? I have 4 minutes. Okay. Another thing I wanted to say was, don't forget to take a look at your sock yarn, because sock yarn can vary so drastically in thickness. Like I have sock yarns that I swear are a lace weight. Like they've got I mean, not a true lace weight, but man, I mean, they have like 475 yards per 100 grams, where then I have other sock yarns that have 395 yards per 100 grams. Those two yarns are not going to be the same thickness. So it could also be that for this project, you grabbed a skein of yarn that's on the lighter side. So maybe all of these things combined are just causing that tightening of the gauge. So those are my thoughts, but check your gauge and see how it compares to what the pattern calls for. Okay, and anybody else who has any thoughts on that, I would love to hear them. All right, I already told you about what I'm wearing. What's coming up? We have the Ooey Gooey Knit Along cowl knit along still going on strong. In 2 weeks I go to Sacred Sheep. I'm so excited. I'm going to be doing a couple live I'll Knit If I Want To's and a steeking class and a meet and greet. So if you're going to be there, I hope to see you. Make sure to say hi. And then that's my last travel for 2025. It's going to be a great way to finish out the year. And shortly after I get back, we jump into a very lovely annual knit along. The pattern for which will be launching right before I leave for Sacred Sheep. So to stay in touch with all of that good stuff, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter. There is a link in the show notes below, as well as a link to the forum if you have a question and you would like to ask something for next week's episode. All right, I have 2 minutes, so I am going to end this here. I hope to see you back here next week. And I hope even more that you have a lovely weekend, that you get to make something, whether it is knitting, sewing, crocheting, spinning, baking, or just making memories with those you love. I hope you have a good one and happy making. Goodbye.